He invited his ex-wife to watch him marry someone else. Seated in the back row, entered through the servant's door, treated like a ghost. He thought he was writing the final chapter of her humiliation. He had no idea she was arriving with 3 5-year-old boys who shared his eyes, his jaw, his blood, and the power to bring down everything he spent 20 years building. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with me until the very end. And before we go any further, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped beneath the door of Elena Marquez's apartment in Boston like something shameful. Like the person who delivered it couldn't bring themselves to knock. It was a thick cream envelope, the kind that cost more than most people's grocery bills, embossed with a gold V on the seal. Elena recognized the letterhead before she even touched it. She stood in her hallway in her hospital scrubs. Hair still damp from the shower, she'd barely had time to take between a 12-hour shift and pick up from her neighbor's apartment, and she stared at that envelope on the floor for a full 30 seconds before she bent down to grab it. Inside was a wedding invitation. Rafael Emilio Voss and Valentina Cruz. The Voss Estate, Atlanta, Georgia. Saturday, the 14th. 6 o'clock in the evening. And beneath the printed text in Rafael's own handwriting, that tight, controlled script she would recognize anywhere. 7 words. The last seat in the back row. Elena read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen counter and went to check on her sons. Mateo was already out of bed, sitting at the table with a crayon gripped in his small fist, drawing something with enormous concentration. Luca was still half asleep on the couch, one shoe on, one shoe missing. The cartoon he'd been watching before dinner still playing on the TV. Nico was in the bathroom, having apparently decided that 9 o'clock at night was the perfect moment to wash his own hair, which he had done with hand soap, and now he stood at the sink with his head tilted sideways trying to get the foam out of his ear. Elena helped him rinse. She found Luca's shoe under the coffee table. She sat with Mateo for a few minutes while he explained, very seriously, that he was drawing a map of their street because he wanted to know where everything was. She kissed all 3 of them. She put them to bed. She turned off the lights. Then she went back to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink, and stood at the counter reading that invitation again. Her friend Priya called at 10:15. Elena had texted her a photo of the handwritten message, and Priya's response had been immediate and physical. Elena could hear it in the way she said her name. Elena. I know. Tell me you're not thinking about going. I haven't decided anything. That man arranged for you to be seated in the back row of his wedding to another woman. He wrote that message himself, with his hand, on purpose. Priya's voice was the kind of controlled that meant she was working very hard not to say what she actually wanted to say. This isn't a peace offering. This isn't closure. This is a man who wants an audience for your humiliation. I know what it is. Then why are you still holding the invitation? Elena looked down. She was in fact still holding it. She set it on the counter. Because I'm tired of running from his version of the story. Silence on the other end. Then, what does that mean? It means I left Atlanta 3 years ago because I thought distance would protect me. And for 3 years I've been living in this city trying to be invisible, trying to rebuild something, trying to just exist without his shadow over everything. And his shadow is still there, Priya. It followed me here. People I work with, they don't know the details, but some of them have heard things. His version of things. She stopped, steadied herself. He told everyone I was the reason we never had children. He told his family, his associates, people in his world who talked to other people who talked to other people. That story has traveled farther than I have. I know, Priya said quietly. My boys are 5 years old. They're going to grow up. They're going to ask questions. And at some point, someone is going to tell them a story about their mother that is a lie. Her voice didn't break. It went very flat instead, the way it did when she was holding something down with both hands. I'm not going to let that happen. So you want to go back there and do what exactly? Stand up at the wedding and announce, no, nothing like that. Elena exhaled slowly. I just want to show up. I want him to see that I'm not hidden. I want his people to see it. And I want... She stopped again, longer this time. I want my children to know that their mother didn't spend her whole life running from a man who hurt her. Priya was quiet for a long moment. You know this could go badly. I know. He has security. He has influence. That estate is his territory. I know. And you'd be bringing the boys. They're the reason I'm going. Another silence. Elena could hear Priya's breathing on the other end, the small sounds of her apartment, a television in the background, the distant rhythm of the city. Finally, Priya said, I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm not asking permission. I'm coming with you. And we're not entering through whatever servant's entrance he had in mind. A pause. We're going through the front. Raphael Voss did not sleep the week before the wedding. This was not unusual for him. He had stopped sleeping through the night somewhere in his late 30s. The same slow erosion that had taken several other things. Patience for weakness, tolerance for sentiment, the ability to sit in a room without cataloging every possible threat. His doctor told him it was stress. His security chief told him it was operational necessity. Raphael told neither of them anything because he didn't discuss what happened inside his body with other people. But this particular insomnia had a specific texture. It wasn't the usual current of calculations, supply lines, territorial negotiations. The three men in his organization, he was fairly certain were talking to the DEA. This was something older and more corrosive, a thing that lived in the part of him he had long ago bricked over and called managed. He kept thinking about Elena. Not the Elena who existed now, wherever she was. Boston, someone had told him, which struck him as an absurd city for her. Too cold, too academic, nothing like the woman he'd married. He thought about the Elena from before. The way she used to sit across from him at dinner with that particular expression, the one that said she was listening to something underneath what he was saying, reading the frequency behind his words. No one else had ever been able to do that. No one else had ever made him feel simultaneously seen and exposed, which were two experiences he had spent his entire adult life avoiding. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon at 2 in the morning and stood at the window of his study looking out over the grounds of the estate. 400 acres in the northern Georgia hills, high fence line, camera perimeter, men on rotating shift. His grandfather had bought the land with money that wasn't clean, and his father had built the house with hands that weren't innocent, and Raphael had inherited both the property and the methods without once questioning whether any of it was worth what it cost. It had simply always been this way. The Voss family did what the Voss family did, and the world made space for it, and that was the order of things. He had built an empire here. He had done things most men couldn't stomach to protect it. He had made decisions that could not be unmade. He had told himself, consistently and without flinching, that strength required the willingness to be merciless. And then 3 years ago, a doctor in a sterile office in Midtown had told him, very quietly and with a compassion Raphael immediately resented, that he was unlikely to father biological children. A rare condition. Not impossible, but unlikely. The doctor had used words like manageable and options and support resources, and Raphael had sat in that chair listening to his own heartbeat, slowing to something strange and distant while the man's mouth kept moving. He had not told Valentina about the diagnosis. He had not told anyone except Damien, and only Damien because Damien had been sitting in the car outside and had read Raphael's face when he came out of the building and had asked directly what was wrong. And in that particular moment, Raphael had not yet built the wall around it, so the truth had slipped out before he could contain it. Damien had listened without speaking. He had driven Raphael home in silence. He had never brought it up again. What Raphael had told everyone else was simpler and more efficient and caused the pain to land on a surface that wasn't him. Elena was the one with the problem. Elena's body was the one that had failed their marriage. Elena was the reason they had no children, and Elena was the reason the marriage couldn't survive. And Elena, fragile, ungrateful, too proud to accept her own limitations, had chosen to leave rather than face the truth. It was a clean story. It did what stories were supposed to do in his world. It established a version of events that no one had enough information to contradict. What he hadn't anticipated was that the story would follow Elena all the way to wherever she'd gone, that it would pursue her through whatever new life she was trying to build, that it would do to her what he had designed it to do, and that he would still be awake at 2 in the morning thinking about the expression on her face the last time he saw her. She hadn't cried. He remembered being surprised by that. She had stood in this house, in this hallway, with 2 suitcases, and she had looked at him with something that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but was something adjacent to both, something that said, I see exactly what you are, and I am choosing to leave it here with you." Then she had walked out, and he had stood in the hallway, and he had felt for approximately 45 seconds like something had been taken from him that he had not agreed to give up. Then he had locked that door and never opened it again. The wedding invitation had been Valentina's idea, initially, some notion of closure, of demonstrating that there was no remaining wound. But Raphael had taken the idea and shaped it into something else. He had a gift for that, taking soft things and sharpening them. The invitation wasn't closure, it was architecture. It was the final frame of a story he was completing for an audience that needed to see it. He wanted Elena in that room. He wanted her to watch him stand at an altar with a woman who was beautiful and influential and eager to be there. He wanted her to sit in the back row. He'd been specific with his security team about that, very specific, and understand that this was where his world had placed her. At the margins. Invisible. No longer relevant. He told himself this was necessary. He told himself it was proportional. He told himself, finishing the bourbon in the dark study with the camera feed cycling through their silent rotations, that he felt nothing about Elena Marquez beyond the strategic satisfaction of closing a chapter. He didn't sleep until almost 4. Damien Cole had worked for Mafia Boss for 11 years, which was long enough to have watched the man become something different from what he'd been, and long enough to know that pointing that out was not something Raphael would receive well. He was 41, Damien, with a face that had been rearranged twice, once in a fight he hadn't started, and once in a car accident that wasn't an accident, and the kind of physical stillness that came from spending a decade in environments where sudden movement got people killed. He managed Raphael's personal security and a rotating team of 12 men. He knew the estate's camera network better than he knew his own apartment. He knew Raphael's habits, his schedules, his patterns of sleep and waking, and the specific way his shoulders changed when he was calculating something versus when he was genuinely angry. He had known, the moment Raphael pulled him aside to give instructions about Elena's arrival, that this was going to be a problem. "I want her stopped at the service gate," Raphael said. They were standing in the operations room on the ground floor of the main house, 3 days before the wedding. A satellite image of the estate grounds was pulled up on one of the monitors, and Raphael had drawn a route on it in red. The path Elena would be directed to take from the service entrance to a row of chairs in the far corner of the outdoor ceremony space. Isolated. Visible only to anyone who looked specifically for her. "I want 2 men on her from the moment she arrives. Not aggressive, just present. She needs to understand the perimeter." "She's a guest," Damien said. "She's an ex-wife who was specifically invited to observe. That's not the same category." "You could have not invited her at all." Raphael looked at him. It was a particular kind of look, measured, flat, the kind that said the comment had been registered and filed under won't be repeated. Damien had learned to read those looks the way some people read weather. "The service gate," Raphael said again, specifically. "Make sure Marcus understands. Not the east entrance, not the side, the service gate." "And if she refuses?" "She won't." He said it with the certainty of a man who had spent 2 decades being obeyed. "She'll be outnumbered, she'll be on my property, and she knows what my name means in this city." Damien looked at the red line on the satellite image. "What if she brings someone with her? A friend, maybe. Have them directed to the same section." He paused. "Keep it quiet. I don't want it to look like... I don't want her to be able to perform for anyone. No dramatic confrontation, just quiet redirection. She takes her seat, the wedding proceeds, she leaves, we're done." "And what does Valentina know about this?" Raphael didn't answer immediately. That was an answer. "Valentina knows Elena is coming. She doesn't need the operational details." Damien said nothing. He looked at the monitor. After a moment he said carefully, "When's the last time you talked to anyone who actually knew Elena? Not your version of events, not what got circulated. Her." Raphael's expression didn't change. "That's not relevant to the operational plan." "I'm not asking about the plan." "Then I'm not sure why you're talking." He tapped the satellite image once with one finger, the route highlighted in red. "Service gate, 2 men, quiet redirection. Do you need anything else from me?" Damien looked at him for one more second. Then, "No." He walked out. In the hallway, he stopped and pressed his back against the wall for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and thought about what he knew, what he had known for 3 years, what he had chosen to stay silent about, because silence in Raphael's world was sometimes the only form of survival available. He thought about the parking lot outside that doctor's office in Midtown. He thought about Raphael's face when he came out through those glass doors. He thought about Elena Marquez, who had been blamed, in front of Raphael's entire network, for a truth that belonged to someone else. He pushed off the wall and went back to work. But something in him had shifted, very slightly, in a direction he couldn't yet name. Elena told her sons they were going on a trip. Matteo, the oldest by 4 minutes, immediately wanted to know if they were going somewhere with a pool. Luca wanted to know if there would be good food. Nico said nothing, but watched Elena's face with the particular attention he always gave to things he wasn't sure about. He was the quietest of the three, the one who processed instead of reacting, and he could read Elena's expressions better than his brothers could, which sometimes unnerved her. "It's in Georgia," she told them, folding small shirts into a bag. "We're going to a big property. There will be a lot of people there." "Do we know the people?" Luca asked. "Some of them." "Are they nice?" Elena considered this with genuine care. "Some of them are." Nico was still watching her. "Is it important?" he asked. She looked at him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, shoes already on. He was the only one of the three who put his shoes on without being reminded, and his dark eyes were very steady and very serious for a 5-year-old. "Yes," she said. "It is." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Then, will you be okay?" "I'll be better than okay," she said. She crossed to him and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "I promise." She wasn't entirely sure it was a promise she could keep, but she was certain, with the kind of certainty that lives in the body rather than the mind, that it was time. She had spent 3 years building something: her practice, her apartment, her life, the routine that kept 3 small boys fed and rested and safe and confident and moving toward a future that was theirs. She had built all of it in the shadow of a lie, and the lie had traveled, and she was tired of being invisible inside a story that had never been hers to begin with. She finished packing. She texted Priya the departure time. She sat at the table after the boys were in bed and looked at the invitation one more time, at the handwriting, at those 7 words. The last seat in the back row. She thought about what it must have cost him to write that. Not emotionally. Raphael wasn't built for emotional cost. She had understood that about him long before she left. She thought about the specific calculation behind it. The precision. The fact that he'd chosen handwriting over print, personal over formal, because he wanted her to feel the individual weight of his intention. He thought he was showing her his power. What he was actually showing her was how much the situation still occupied him. Power didn't send handwritten insults. Power didn't feel the need to arrange humiliation with operational specificity. Power didn't invite someone it no longer cared about to watch it get married. Raphael Voss was not over it. And that meant, in ways she was only beginning to calculate, that he was not as controlled as he believed. She put the invitation face down on the table. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. The morning of the wedding was clear and cold for April in Atlanta, the kind of morning where the light came in at a hard angle and made everything look sharper than it was. The estate had been in preparation since before dawn. Caterers, florists, a team of event coordinators in matching black who moved through the grounds with the efficiency of a military operation, which was not coincidental because Raphael had given his event planner a document that detailed acceptable setup windows, staffing positions, and flow management protocols with the same structure he used for actual operations. Valentina Cruz had arrived the previous evening and was staying in the east wing of the house. She was 32, with the kind of presence that professional beauty tends to produce. She had been photographed for enough magazine covers that she had developed an unconscious composure in front of attention, a way of inhabiting any room that was both natural and slightly performed. She was smart too, which was something people consistently underestimated about her because they got distracted by the other parts first. She had been with Raphael for 14 months. She had watched him operate at close range, had seen the things that happened in his world, and had made the considered choice each time to stay. Not from naivety, she was clear with herself about that, but from a calculation of her own. His world had costs, yes, but it also had protections and resources, and a kind of security that the world she'd come from could not provide. What she hadn't fully accounted for was the geography of his interior. There were rooms in Raphael she had never been allowed into. He was attentive, generous in specific ways, and fundamentally opaque in others. She had attributed the opacity to the nature of his work. Some things, in his world, had to stay compartmentalized, and she had accepted that. But lately she had begun noticing something different, not just the professional compartmentalization, something older, something that lived in the way he went quiet sometimes when his first wife's name came up, the specific texture of the silence, which was not the silence of someone who had moved on. She had found the security briefing by accident. She hadn't been snooping, she was clear about that to herself. She had simply been looking for a folder on his desk that contained some vendor agreements he'd asked her to review, and the briefing had been in the same stack, and she had read the first page before she registered that she probably shouldn't. Subject: Arrival Protocols, E. Marquez, Service Gate, two-man escort, restricted seating. The language was operational, neutrally worded, exactly the kind of document Raphael produced for logistical management. But the subject was not logistics. The subject was a woman who had been his wife. Valentina had put the briefing back in the stack. She had found the vendor folder. She had gone back to the East Wing and sat on the edge of the bed for a very long time. She thought about the night, 6 weeks ago, when she'd asked Raphael directly about his first marriage. She'd done it carefully. She wasn't a woman who asked questions without purpose, and he had given her the version she'd heard before. They'd grown apart. They had wanted different things. There were medical complications that had put strain on the relationship. She had chosen to leave. Clean, concise. The story of a man who had dealt with something painful and resolved it, and continued forward. The security briefing didn't describe a resolved situation. A resolved situation did not require operational protocols. She sat on the bed in the East Wing and listened to the sounds of the estate. Voices outside, the distant thump of equipment being moved, the wedding being assembled like a set. And she thought about what she was about to walk into. Literally. In approximately 9 hours, she was scheduled to walk down an aisle and stand across from this man and say words that would not be undone easily. She needed more information. She picked up her phone and called the one person in Raphael's orbit she had decided to trust. Damien answered on the second ring. "I need to talk to you," Valentina said. A beat. "About what?" "I found the briefing. About his ex-wife." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Damien said, "Where are you?" "East Wing." "Stay there. Give me 10 minutes." He came through the private entrance from the garden, which meant he'd avoided the main corridor where staff were moving in and out. That itself told her something. A man who chose a private entrance for a private conversation was a man who had things to be private about. He sat across from her in the sitting room, in the armchair that faced the door, an old habit, she suspected, of a man who needed to see what was coming. He was wearing his usual dark jacket, hands loose in his lap, and his face had that quality she'd noticed before, the absolute stillness of someone exercising enormous control over their own expression. "What do you know about the end of his marriage?" she asked. Directly. She had decided not to approach it from the side. Damien looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not quite discomfort, more like recognition. "What has he told you?" "He told me Elena had medical complications, that she couldn't have children, that the marriage couldn't survive it." The stillness in Damien's face held for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked down at his hands. "That's the version he tells." Valentina felt the floor shift slightly. "And the other version?" "I'm not—" He stopped. Breathed. Started again. "There are things I know that aren't mine to put into a different person's story. I've stayed out of this for 3 years. She's coming here today." "I know." "He has a security operation plan to manage her arrival." "I know that too." He met her eyes again. "I put it together." "Did you have any reservations about putting it together?" Something shifted. Not much, but enough. "Yes." Valentina leaned forward slightly. "Damien, I am about to marry this man. I'm about to put my name next to his and stand up in front of 400 people and commit to his world. I need to know what I'm committing to." She paused. "Not the business. I understand the business. I mean, I need to know what happened to that woman." Damien was quiet for a long moment. The sounds of the estate drifted in through the windows. Caterers, the distant voice of an event coordinator, someone testing a microphone. The ordinary mechanics of a wedding being assembled. He looked at the door, then back at her. "The medical complication," he said slowly, "was his." Valentina didn't move. He got a diagnosis 3 years ago, before the marriage ended. He called it... He stopped again, started again. He couldn't accept it. What it meant for his image. What people in his world would say. So he changed it. He put it somewhere else. He looked at her directly. On Elena. She had no idea it was happening until after she'd left and found out through people she knew here. Valentina sat very still. In her chest, something she had been holding in a careful balance was beginning to tilt. He destroyed her reputation. Among his people, yes, people who talked to other people. It spread. And you knew. I was there when he got the diagnosis. I drove him home. Damien's jaw tightened. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was between him and her, that people in this world don't survive making corrections to a man like Raphael's version of his own story. He looked away briefly. I've been telling myself that for 3 years. He raised children, Valentina said quietly. Someone told me. I heard her name once in connection with... She has children? I don't know the details of her life now. Valentina sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. The microphysics of the past 14 months were rearranging themselves in her mind. Not shattering, not collapsing dramatically, just slowly resolving into a different picture than the one she'd been looking at. Raphael, precise and controlled and generous in specific ways, who went quiet when Elena's name came up. Raphael, who had designed a security operation for his ex-wife's arrival at his wedding. Raphael, who told her a story that omitted the structural fact. What would happen, she said carefully, if the truth came out today? Damien looked at her. Today specifically? 400 people, his family, his associates, his enemies, everyone he spent 2 decades building a reputation for. Damien was quiet. Then, it would depend on how it came out. If it came from you? He said nothing. But the look on his face said everything about what 3 years of silence cost. Valentina stood up. She smoothed her robe. She looked at Damien for a long moment, and in that look was not a question but an acknowledgement. The recognition that 2 people in this room were carrying the same weight, and that before the day was over, they were both going to have to make a decision about what to do with it. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Damien nodded. He left through the garden entrance. Valentina stood at the window and looked out at the estate. The white chairs being arranged in perfect rows, the arch being assembled with flowers, the machinery of the day. Raphael had planned assembling itself piece by piece in the morning light. She picked up her phone. She did not call Raphael. She thought about a woman she had never met, who was getting into a car somewhere in Boston right now, who was driving toward this estate with... What? Children? What was it she had heard? She needed to know more. She needed to know exactly what was walking through those gates today, because whatever it was, Valentina Cruz was no longer certain it was something Raphael had accounted for. And she was no longer certain she wanted to be standing at that altar when he found out he was wrong. What? Elena's black SUV cleared the Georgia state line at 4:15 in the afternoon. Priya was driving. Elena was in the passenger seat. In the back, Matteo had fallen asleep against the window. Luca was looking at something on a tablet with the volume low. Nico was watching the landscape move past with that steady, absorptive attention he brought to everything. Elena watched the road. She had dressed that morning with care, not the performative care of someone trying to prove something through appearance, but the methodical care of someone who understood that how she arrived at this place would be the first thing anyone saw. The dress was gold, not subtle, not apologetic. She had bought it specifically for this because gold was not the color of someone who had accepted the back row. Her hair was down. Her hands, in her lap, were steady. She kept thinking about what Priya had said last night, after they'd put the boys to bed in the hotel room. Whatever happens, you're not walking in there alone, and neither are they. She had gestured toward the door of the room where 3 small bodies were breathing quietly in the dark. They've never been alone in this story either. They just didn't know it yet. Elena had thought about that for a long time. Her sons were 5 years old. They had been raised on the eastern edge of Boston in a 2-bedroom apartment with a doctor for a mother and a rotating cast of Priya's family as their extended world. They knew they had a father. She had been honest about that, within the limits of what was appropriate for their age, that there was a man, that the situation was complicated, that when they were older, she would explain more. They had accepted this the way children accepted the difficult things their parents told them. Not entirely, not without questions, but with the fundamental trust that their mother was telling them what she could. Today, in some form, they were going to see him. She hadn't fully planned what that would look like. She had told herself this wasn't about the boys. It was about her, about the truth, about refusing to remain invisible inside his story. But she was honest enough with herself to know that was not entirely true. Something in her had decided that the boys should exist in this space, physically, visibly, in front of the people who had accepted Raphael's lie. She couldn't name exactly what she wanted to come from that. She just knew that their presence was necessary in a way she felt in her chest rather than understood in her mind. Nico turned from the window. He looked at her. Mom. Yeah, baby. Are we almost there? About 20 minutes. He looked at her for another moment, then, your hands are doing the thing. She looked down. She was pressing her right thumb against her left palm, a habit she had when she was working through something. She stopped. I'm fine, she said. I know, Nico said. He looked back out the window. After a moment, I just wanted you to know I noticed. She looked at him in the back seat, this small person who had inherited, apparently, the particular gift of seeing through her, and something in her chest tightened and then released. Thank you, she said. The estate appeared on the horizon at 4:42. Even from the road, even before the gate, you could see the scope of it, the long fence line, the drive lined with trees that had probably been planted by someone now dead, the main house visible in the distance like a statement. Elena had been here before. She had lived here, briefly, in the early years of the marriage, before Raphael had moved them to the house in Buckhead that had felt more like neutral territory. She had always found the estate, its scale, its deliberate impressiveness, a little exhausting, the architectural equivalent of a voice that was always slightly too loud. She could see the service gate from the road. She could see the two men stationed there, in dark jackets, who were very specifically not looking casual. She also saw that the main gate, the one at the end of the long drive, the one that the caterers and the event vehicles were using, the one through which guests would logically arrive, was open. Main gate, she said to Priya. Priya didn't hesitate. She turned onto the drive. One of the men at the service gate started moving. Elena watched him in the mirror. He was speaking into a radio. She could imagine the conversation on the other end, could imagine, with reasonable accuracy, Raphael's voice when he got the call, the specific quality of his stillness when something didn't go according to plan. The SUV moved up the long drive. Matteo woke up. He looked out the window at the trees, the estate, the white tents visible on the lawn. Is this it? He said. This is it, Elena said. Luca took out an earbud. It's big. Yes. Nico said nothing. He was looking ahead, at the house, with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, a watchfulness that was too old for his face. The SUV reached the top of the drive. A man in a dark jacket moved toward the vehicle, not aggressively, not obviously, but with purpose. Through the windshield. Elena could see the event space coming into view, the chairs, the arch, the guests already assembling, the whole production of Raphael's carefully designed afternoon. Priya put the car in park. Ready? She said. Elena looked at the man in the dark jacket approaching the driver's side. She thought about the service gate. She thought about 7 words in handwriting she recognized. She thought about 3 years in Boston and a story that had followed her there, and the 3 boys in the back seat who had never once chosen any of this, and who deserved, at minimum, to exist in the world as what they were. She opened her door. She stepped out onto the drive of the Voss estate in a gold dress, and the afternoon light caught her, and she stood very still for just a moment before she turned back to the car. Come on, guys, she said. Let's go. The back doors opened. 3 small boys stepped out onto the gravel. And somewhere inside the main house, a radio crackled, and a voice said something that made the man who heard it go very, very still. The radio crackled twice before Marcus Reyes answered it. He was standing 20 feet from the SUV, close enough to see the gold dress, close enough to see the woman's face, which was composed in a way that made him immediately uneasy, because people who were nervous looked nervous, and this woman did not look nervous at all. She looked like someone who had made a decision and arrived at the other side of it. Then the back doors opened. Marcus had been with Raphael's security operation for 6 years. He had seen things in those 6 years that required a particular relationship with shock. You either learned to metabolize it quickly or you didn't last. He had cultivated the fast metabolism. He could process most things within 2 seconds and produce an appropriate response. The 3 boys standing on the gravel of the Voss Estate Drive took him longer than 2 seconds. They were identical. Not similar. Identical, the way that made you look twice and then a third time, certain that some trick of light or perception was responsible. 5 years old, maybe, with dark hair and the kind of dark eyes that in another context, in a different face, on a man Marcus had spent 6 years working for, would not have required any processing time at all. He pressed the radio. "We have a situation at the main gate." "Define situation," came the response from the operations room. Marcus looked at the boys. He looked at the woman in the gold dress, who was watching him with the patience of someone who had anticipated this moment for a long time. "Get Damien, right now." Inside the main house, in the room off the east corridor that had been designated as the groom's preparation space, Raphael was standing at a mirror adjusting his tie when his phone buzzed. He didn't check it immediately. He had been deliberately keeping his phone at a distance in the last hour, allowing the event coordinator to manage through his team, preserving his composure through the specific discipline of not being contactable. The wedding was running on schedule. The guests were assembling. Valentina was in the East Wing preparing. Everything was proceeding. The phone buzzed again. He checked it. The message was from Marcus. "She's here. Main gate. You need to see the footage." Raphael's hand stopped moving. He looked at himself in the mirror for exactly 1 second. Then he picked up the phone and called the operations room. "Feed me the main gate camera," he said. The image came through on his phone, grainy but clear enough. The black SUV. Elena, standing on the drive in a gold dress that he registered peripherally as a statement he hadn't anticipated. The woman beside her, a friend, someone he didn't recognize. And then the back of the vehicle, and 3 small figures stepping out onto the gravel. And Raphael stood in the preparation room with the phone in his hand and felt something happen to his chest that he did not immediately have language for. He enlarged the image. He looked at the boys. He looked at them for a long time. Then he set the phone face down on the table, very carefully, the way you set something down when you don't trust your hands. He stood at the mirror. His reflection looked back at him. His tie was still slightly off. He left it. Damien reached the main gate in 4 minutes. He came around the side of the house at a controlled pace that wasn't quite a run, but communicated urgency to anyone watching, which was a skill he had refined over years in environments where visible panic was its own kind of liability. Elena saw him coming. Something in her face changed. Not surprise, more like recognition with an edge of wariness. She remembered Damien. He had always been the man who stood slightly apart from what Raphael did, close enough to enable it, far enough to watch himself do it with a certain discomfort. She had never been sure what to do with that. It hadn't protected her. He stopped 6 feet away, looked at her, looked at the boys, a long and specific look, and she watched him process what he was seeing with the same terrible clarity she had anticipated from anyone who knew Raphael's face well enough. "Elena," he said. "Damien." A pause. The noise of the estate continued around them. Voices, movement, the ordinary sounds of a large event being conducted. And in the middle of it, the 2 of them stood in a specific kind of quiet. "He didn't know," Damien said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," she said. "He didn't." Damien looked at the boys again. Matteo had found a pebble and was examining it with concentration. Luca was looking at the main house with open curiosity. Nico was watching Damien with that level, unblinking attention he gave to things he was assessing. Damien looked back at Elena. "You should know that he has a plan for how today goes." "I know he does." "He's not going to... This isn't going to be easy for you." "I didn't come here for easy." Something shifted in Damien's face. A small movement, barely perceptible, but she had always been good at reading the small movements. "Why did you come?" She looked at him steadily. "Because my children have a right to exist in the world as what they are. And because I'm done being the lie he told to protect himself." Damien was quiet. Behind him, Marcus had retreated a careful distance, close enough to respond to instruction, far enough to give the appearance of not listening, which meant he was listening very carefully. He's going to see them, Damien said quietly. On the camera feed. He's probably already seen them. Good. Elena, I know who he is, Damien. I was married to him. She kept her voice level, but beneath it was something with edges. I'm not here to start a war. I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm here because I exist. My children exist. And we are not walking through a servant's entrance. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned to Marcus. Main gate. Let them through. Marcus didn't move immediately. Damien, the instructions were, I know what the instructions were. A pause. The kind of pause that establishes territory. Let them through. Marcus stepped back. He spoke into his radio, low and quick. The event coordinator appeared from somewhere near the tent line, saw the situation, and made the specific calculation of a professional who understood when events had outpaced planning. Elena looked at Priya. Priya looked back at her with an expression that contained multitudes, fear, solidarity, the specific adrenaline of a person who had agreed to do something difficult and was now doing it. Ready? Elena said, the same word Priya had used in the car. Not even slightly, Priya said. Let's go. Elena put one hand briefly on Nico's shoulder. Not steering, just contact, and they walked through the main gate of the Voss estate and onto the grounds where 400 people were assembling to watch Raphael Voss begin what he believed would be the controlled final act of a story he had authored alone. Raphael came down from the preparation room by the back stairs. He moved through the house with the specific efficiency of a man who had learned to perform composure in situations where composure was a survival requirement, and he had been performing it for so long that the performance had become structural. It was load-bearing now, part of the architecture of how he moved through spaces. His security chief intercepted him in the ground floor corridor with an expression Raphael recognized as the face of someone delivering information they would rather not be delivering. She's on the grounds, the man said. I know. Damien authorized? I know what Damien authorized. He kept walking. Where is she now? Moving toward the ceremony space. The event coordinator is trying to redirect her toward the don't redirect her. He said it without stopping. The security chief fell into step beside him, struggling slightly to match the pace. Pull the two-man escort. All of it. Cancel the protocol. A beat. Cancel. Did I stutter? Silence. Then, no, sir. Good. And tell Damien I want to see him before the ceremony. 15 minutes. My study. He turned down a corridor that led toward the east side of the house. The security chief split off. Raphael continued alone, which was how he preferred to move when something in him was running hot. He needed the space to bring it down, to find the temperature that let him function. The boys. He pressed his back against the wall for a moment in an empty corridor and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique his father had taught him, which was the only genuinely useful thing his father had left him, and even that had been framed as operational instruction rather than care. You breathe that way when you need to think. Feeling doesn't help you. Thinking does. Get to thinking. 3 boys, 5 years old, which put their birth approximately 9 months after, which meant during the marriage, during the last year of it, when things between them had already begun to fracture, when Elena had started going quieter and Raphael had started going harder, and neither of them had found the language to cross the distance between those two responses. He did the math. He kept doing the math, and it kept coming out the same way. He pushed off the wall. He needed to think. He needed to move. He needed to not stand in an empty corridor while the event outside proceeded without him, and 400 people waited, and his wedding coordinator texted him updates every 3 minutes, because that was the arrangement they had agreed on. He needed to see Damien. But first, he needed to do something that went against every operational instinct he had developed over 20 years of running an organization that survived by controlling information. He needed to see her. On. Elena found a position near the back of the outdoor ceremony space. Not the back row specifically, not the seat with the implicit message, but a standing position at the edge of the tent canopy where she could see the space and be seen in it. Priya stood beside her. The boys were close, Luca and Matteo already drawn toward each other in the way they did when they were uncertain, Nico slightly apart, watching. Guests had begun noticing. It happened gradually at first. A look, a second look. The way attention moves through a crowd when something interrupts the expected pattern. Elena was not unaware of it. She had expected it. What she hadn't fully anticipated was the specific quality of the attention from the people she recognized. The faces from Raphael's world that she had known 3 years ago, the wives and associates, and the various people who occupied the orbit of the Voss family's influence. She saw the recognition land. She saw the calculations happen behind people's eyes. Who she was, what her presence meant, the last things they'd heard about her, which were the things Raphael had put into circulation. She watched those calculations collide with what was standing in front of them. Not the broken woman the story described, but a straight-backed woman in a gold dress with 3 identical children who looked exactly like the man whose name they'd all been told this woman had disgraced. A woman named Carolyn Voss, Raphael's aunt, one of the few people in the family Elena had genuinely liked, crossed the space toward her. She was 60-something, sharp-featured, always impeccably dressed, and her face as she approached was doing something complicated. Elena. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at her, and then involuntarily looked at the boys. A long look. When she looked back up, her eyes were different. My God. Hello, Carolyn. These are... She stopped. Tried again. These are your children. Yes. Carolyn's mouth opened and then closed. She looked at the boys again. Matteo, who had found another interesting pebble. Luca, who was now trying to communicate something to Priya through gestures. Nico, who was looking at Carolyn with his steady, measuring attention. How old are they? Carolyn said quietly. 5. The math was doing its work again. Elena could see it. 5 years old meant the marriage hadn't been over as long as the story implied. 5 years old meant certain things about certain timelines that Carolyn, who had known Raphael all his life, was now quietly assembling. Elena, Carolyn said, even more quietly. Does he know? He will. Carolyn absorbed this. Her composure was good. Elena had always respected that about her. But something had changed in the set of her face, a shift in the weight of what she was holding. You came here today knowing, yes, he has a temper. I know. And 400 people on this property. I know that too. Carolyn looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Elena hadn't expected. She moved to stand beside her. Not dramatically, she just repositioned slightly so that she was no longer at a visitor's angle but alongside. It was a small gesture. It meant something specific in the grammar of Raphael's world, where positioning was never accidental. Tell me what you need, Carolyn said. Just to be here, Elena said. That's all. Raphael came across the lawn from the side of the house, and he saw her before she saw him. He stopped walking. He had been in motion consistently for the past 20 minutes. Preparation room, corridor, back stairs, various points of the estate. And the motion had been functional, a way of managing the thing in his chest that kept trying to become something he couldn't afford it to become. But now he stopped completely and stood at the edge of the guest area and looked across the assembled crowd to where Elena stood under the tent canopy in a gold dress with Carolyn beside her and 3 children around her feet. From this distance, with this many people between them, he could take her in without the weight of direct attention. She had changed, not in the ways he might have expected, not in the direction of diminishment or damage. She looked like someone who had been through something and come out with more density, not less. Her posture was the thing that struck him most. She had always had a particular way of standing, straight, not tense, the physical expression of someone who had decided where they stood and didn't need to advertise it. That was still there, but it was more settled now, more rooted. He moved his eyes to the boys. He had told himself, coming down the stairs, that he would look at them objectively, that he would assess the situation the way he assessed all situations, information in, analysis, response. No static, no interference from the parts of him that were not operational. He looked at his sons. He did not know with certainty that they were his sons, that knowledge would require conversation and documentation, but the certainty didn't require any of those things because there was simply nothing to analyze. There was only the fact of 3 faces that shared his jaw and his eyes, and the particular angle of the brow that his own father had and his grandfather before him. Raphael Voss, who had not felt unsteady in a long time, felt unsteady. Then Elena turned and saw him. Across the space, across the crowd, Through the noise and movement of 400 people assembling for a wedding he had designed as a demonstration of power, they looked at each other. Her face didn't change. No flash of fear, no anger, no performance. She just looked at him, the way she always had, with that frequency-reading attention, the one that got underneath his words. He walked toward her. The crowd felt it before they understood it, the way a room feels a shift in pressure without being able to name the source. Conversations continued, guests mingled. The event coordinator spoke into a headset somewhere nearby, and yet something moved through the assembled people. A subtle reorientation, faces turning slightly in the direction of something happening at the edge of the tent. Raphael stopped 3 feet from Elena. Priya moved half a step sideways, putting herself within reach of the boys without making it obvious. Carolyn stayed exactly where she was. "Elena," Raphael said. "Raphael," she said. His eyes moved to the boys. He couldn't help it. They moved there the way they would have moved to any significant tactical detail in any environment, immediate and involuntary. Matteo and Luca had both gone still in the particular way children went still when they sensed adult tension. Nico was looking at Raphael with an expression that Elena found later, when she thought about it, almost unbearable in its directness. The look of a child who was filing information carefully. Raphael looked back at Elena. When he spoke, his voice was very low, the controlled low that meant he was applying significant pressure to whatever was underneath it. "You should have told me." "You didn't give me a way to tell you anything," she said just as quietly. "You made sure of that." "That's not—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "This isn't a conversation we should be having here." "Then maybe you should have thought about where you were having it before you sent me a handwritten invitation to sit in the back row." Something moved through his expression. Quickly, controlled, but she caught it. The specific flicker of a man who has been found in the act of something he told himself was justified and is now confronting the fact that it doesn't look the way it felt from the inside. "I need you to come inside," he said. "We need to talk." "I don't think so." "Elena?" "I'm a guest at your wedding, Raphael. I'll stand here." She kept her voice even. "Unless you're planning to have me removed, in which case, go ahead. Do that in front of everyone." His eyes swept the space briefly. Taking in the proximity of guests, the event coordinator in his peripheral vision, Carolyn standing 2 feet away with an expression he could read perfectly well. He understood the geometry of the moment with the speed he brought to operational calculation. She had chosen this position deliberately. She had chosen this visibility deliberately. For the first time in a very long time, someone had set the terms before he arrived. "We need to have a conversation," he said again, tightly. "I agree," she said, "but not somewhere you control alone." A beat. A long one. The specific length of a man deciding whether to push. "Tonight," he said. "After." "That's your call," she said. "I'm not leaving until the ceremony is over." He looked at her. She looked back. The frequency between them, that thing she'd always been able to read and he'd always both resented and depended on, was running at a pitch neither of them could ignore. Then one of the boys spoke. It was Nico. He had been quiet through the entire exchange, watching with that processing stillness of his, and now he looked up at Raphael with a 5-year-old's directness that had no armor in it and no calculation, and said simply, "Are you the man in the picture?" The world reorganized itself slightly. Raphael looked down at him. Something in Raphael's face did something that Elena had not seen it do in all the years she'd known him. It didn't know what to be. "What picture?" Raphael said. "The one Mom kept," Nico said. "In the box under her bed. She said you were someone she used to know." Elena hadn't moved. She kept her face still with considerable effort because she had not in fact told him to say that, and in fact was not entirely certain she'd ever discussed the photograph with any of the boys. But Nico noticed things and retained them, and apparently had been doing this quietly for some time. Matteo looked up from his pebble. Luca had stopped moving. Raphael looked at Nico for a long moment. Then he looked at Elena, and she saw something in his expression she had never seen before in 20 years of knowing his face. He looked afraid. Not of her, not of what was happening. He looked afraid of himself, of what he was recognizing, of what was assembling itself in front of him in the form of 3 small boys on the lawn of his estate on the day of his wedding. Before either of them could speak, a voice cut across the space. "Raphael!" It was Damien. He had come from the direction of the house, and his face had the particular quality Elena recognized from the gate. A man who had arrived at a decision and was standing on the other side of it. And the side he was standing on was not comfortable, but it was the one he'd chosen. He stopped at the edge of the group. He looked at Raphael. "I need to talk to you, before the ceremony." "Not now," Raphael said. "Now," Damien said. "It's important." "I said not, but it's about the diagnosis." The word landed like a stone hitting still water. Raphael's entire body went still. Around them, the nearest guests had not heard. The distance was sufficient, the ambient noise of 400 people providing cover. But the small group within the geometry of the tent canopy heard it, and the word sat in the air between them with a specific density. Elena watched Raphael's face. She watched him understand in real time what Damien saying that word in this context and with this timing meant. She watched him understand that Damien, who had kept his silence for 3 years, had apparently decided that this was the day the silence ended. Raphael looked at Damien with an expression that could have cut glass. Damien looked back at him without flinching. "My study," Raphael said, very quietly. "Wherever you want," Damien said. "But we're having the conversation." And across the lawn, in the east wing of the house, a woman in a white dress stood at a window she had drifted to without quite meaning to, and watched the geometry of the scene below. The gold dress, the man in the dark suit, the 3 children, and the stillness at the center of it all, and understood, with a certainty that settled in her chest like something heavy and final, that the wedding she was dressed for was not going to happen the way anyone had planned. Valentina Cruz turned away from the window. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at the engagement ring on her left hand for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made a call that had nothing to do with the wedding. In Raphael's study, with the door closed and the sounds of the estate muffled behind thick walls, Damien sat across from the man he had worked for and protected and enabled for 11 years and said the thing he had not said for 3. "I'm done keeping it." Raphael stood at the window with his back to the room. He was looking at the grounds, at the ceremony space, the guests, the white arch with its flowers. His hands were clasped behind him, with the controlled stillness of someone who was not allowing their body to express what was happening inside it. "You're choosing an interesting moment," Raphael said. "I've been choosing bad moments to not say it for 3 years," Damien said. "Today seemed like the one I couldn't survive adding to the list. She came here to blow this up. She came here because you invited her." A pause. "You invited her, Raphael. You wrote that message. You set up the service gate protocol. You designed this. And then she showed up in a way you didn't design, and now you want to call it sabotage." His voice was steady, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. A friction, an edge. "The boys are yours." "I don't know that." "You looked at them, you know." Silence. Raphael's shoulders moved slightly. A breath, controlled. The technique from his father. "You told me in a parking lot in Midtown that you couldn't have children," Damien continued. "And then Elena left. And then you told everyone that she was the one with the problem. You did that. I watched you do it, and I said nothing, and I have to live with that. But I'm not going to stand in this room and watch you." He stopped, recalibrated. When he continued, his voice was quieter but no less direct. "She raised 3 children alone. She built a whole life while you were telling everyone she failed. And those children are out there on your lawn, and they have your face, and you are 20 minutes from walking down an aisle with a woman you haven't been honest with about any of this." Raphael turned from the window. His face was the flattest she had ever been. All the performance stripped out, the composed authority absent, leaving something more elemental. Not anger, not yet, though that was in there somewhere. Something that looked, uncomfortably, like a man seeing himself. "What are you telling me to do?" he said. "I'm not telling you anything," Damien said. "I'm done telling you what to do. I'm done managing information to protect decisions you made badly." He stood up. "I'm letting you know that if you walk out that door and proceed with this wedding and do whatever you're planning to do about Elena and those boys, you're doing it knowing that I know the truth and knowing that other people are going to know it too before this day is over. Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you where I stand." Raphael looked at him for a long time. The sounds of the estate filtered through the walls. A microphone check, a voice counting, the machinery of the event continuing in ignorance of what was happening in this room. 11 years, Raphael said. Yes, Damien said, and this is how you use them. I'm not using them, I'm finishing them. He walked to the door. His hand on the handle, he stopped and looked back once. She's not here to destroy you, Raphael. She told me that at the gate. She's here because her kids have a right to exist in the world without being built on a lie you made for yourself. He opened the door. The rest is your decision. He left. Raphael stood alone in his study. Outside the window, the ceremony space was filling. The guests were taking their seats. The event coordinator was visible in the distance, moving with the contained urgency of someone managing a schedule. The white arch stood at the far end of the rows of chairs, floral and deliberate, the physical form of the story Raphael had designed. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at his own reflection in the dark glass of the window frame. His face, his jaw, the architecture of his features that had shown up in 3 small boys on his lawn. And for the first time in a very long time, Raphael Voss had no operational response to what he was looking at. His phone buzzed. A message from Valentina. We need to talk before this starts. Come to the East Wing. He read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood in the study for one more moment, alone with the thing he had bricked over and called managed, and felt it begin at last to give. Raphael walked to the East Wing. He took the interior route, through the main corridor, past the formal dining room that had been converted into a staging area for the catering team, past the secondary staircase, through the connecting hallway that most guests didn't know existed. He moved quickly, but not urgently. The distinction mattered. In his world, urgency was information, and he was not prepared to give anyone the information that he was a man managing a crisis on his wedding day. He knocked once on the East Wing door and opened it without waiting. Valentina was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was fully dressed, the white gown, the veil folded beside her on the coverlet, her hair arranged with the precision of someone who had spent 2 hours in a professional's hands. The room smelled of flowers and hairspray and something else underneath both of those, something more chemical and less pleasant. She was not crying. That was the first thing he registered. He had prepared himself, on the walk over, for some version of emotional disruption. Tears, accusations delivered through them, the specific performance of hurt that he knew how to navigate because he knew its shape. Valentina was not performing anything. She was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, and her eyes clear, and her expression the one he had seen her use in boardrooms when she was working through a problem that required more than she had initially brought to the table. He recognized it because he used the same expression himself. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Through the window behind her, the ceremony space was visible, the rows of filling chairs, the arch, the soft afternoon light on everything. They had 40 minutes before the schedule required him to be at the altar. "Tell me about the diagnosis," she said. The word had a different quality from how Damien had used it. Damien had used it as a detonation device, calculated, timed for effect. Valentina used it the way a surgeon used a scalpel, precise, specific, aimed at something she had already identified. "Who told you?" he said. It was not a question. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. Damien told me." She watched his face absorb that. "This morning. I asked him directly, and he told me directly. Which is how I've been having conversations with people around you, apparently, because the conversations I've been having with you have been missing some load-bearing information." She paused. "Tell me what happened 3 years ago." Raphael moved to the chair near the window and sat down. He did this deliberately, sitting rather than standing, choosing proximity to her eye line rather than a position that implied authority over the room. It was a strategic choice, and he was aware of it as he made it. And he was aware that she would know it was a strategic choice, and he made it anyway because he needed to begin somewhere, and this was the beginning he could manage. "I had a medical appointment in the spring of that year," he said. "A specialist. There were concerns about fertility, about whether I could father children." He stopped. The words had a texture he had not anticipated. Not the texture of confession, which would have implied some kind of relief, but something harder and less resolved. The diagnosis was not favorable. Not favorable meaning. Meaning it was unlikely. Biologically unlikely. Valentina was quiet for a moment. "And Elena?" Elena and I had been having difficulties. The marriage it was under strain. There were other issues. He heard himself reaching for context, for framing, for the architecture that would make the next part land differently. He stopped reaching. I told people that the fertility issue was hers, that she was the one with the medical problem, that the marriage ended because of her limitations, not mine. Silence. Valentina looked at him with those clear boardroom eyes. You destroyed her reputation, she said, not as an accusation, as a fact being named. I managed a narrative. You destroyed her reputation, she said again, the same register, the same patience, declining to accept the reframe. In a world where your name carries the weight it does, among people who repeat things, you told a lie about her that followed her out of the city and out of this world and into whatever life she was trying to build. She paused. And she has children. Yes. Your children. He said nothing. Raphael. Her voice changed slightly. Not softer, more specific. Are those boys yours? He looked at the window. The ceremony space, the chairs, the arch. I haven't... There's been no confirmation. No... Look at me, she said. He looked at her. Are they yours? A long moment, the longest of the day, which had already contained several long moments. Yes, he said. I believe they are. Valentina absorbed this without visible reaction. She was good at that. He had admired it. In the 14 months, the capacity to receive difficult information without immediately externalizing it. She processed it first, held it, looked at it from the inside before she decided what to do with it on the outside. She didn't tell you, Valentina said. No. Did she know she was pregnant when she left? I don't know. Have you asked her? I haven't had... We've spoken for approximately 4 minutes since she arrived. Valentina stood up. She walked to the window and stood beside the chair where he was sitting, looking out at the same view. From this angle, he could see her profile, the line of her jaw, the way her hands were clasped in front of her, controlled and considered. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to tell me the truth, not a managed version of it, the actual truth. Go ahead. Why did you invite her today? He didn't answer immediately. Not the reason you told me, Valentina said. Not closure or moving forward or any of the other language that was in that conversation. The real reason. He looked at his hands. They were very still in his lap, the way he held them when he was applying control. I wanted her to see what she left, he said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. Or what she lost, Valentina said. He said nothing. Because those are different things, she continued. Seeing what she left means you're showing her a life that continued without her. Seeing what she lost means you believe she gave something up, that she made a mistake by leaving. She turned from the window and looked at him. Which one is it? The quiet in the room had a specific quality. Outside, someone tested the sound system again. A note, held and released. The event continuing on its schedule, unaware. Both, he said. Valentina looked at him for a long time. Her expression had moved somewhere he hadn't seen it go before. Not anger, not hurt exactly, more like the face of someone arriving at a destination they had suspected was coming and were now standing at. You're still in love with her, she said. I'm not saying it as an accusation. I'm saying it because I think you need to hear someone say it out loud, because you have clearly been refusing to say it to yourself. Her voice was even, not unkind, the voice of someone delivering a diagnosis of their own. You invited your ex-wife to your wedding not to show her your power. You invited her because you can't stop thinking about her. You designed this whole thing, the seating, the entrance, the operational protocols, because you needed to see her face when she saw you with someone else. And she showed up with your children, and it has broken something open in you that you have been holding shut for 3 years. Raphael stood up. He moved to the other side of the room, not aggressively, just needing the distance, needing to not be sitting while this conversation occurred. He stood near the dressing table and looked at the surface of it, the scattered cosmetics, the veil beside the mirror, the ordinary material of a day that had been designed to be one thing and was becoming something entirely different. That is not why I invited her, he said. Then tell me why. With specific words. Not framing, not narrative management. Tell me the actual reason. He turned and looked at her. She was standing near the window in her wedding dress, and her expression was the clearest thing in the room. Clearer than his thoughts, clearer than anything he'd managed since he'd seen that camera feed. He opened his mouth to speak, and then the door opened. It was Marcus, and his face said something had happened that could not wait. "I apologize," Marcus said, and he looked genuinely sorry to be standing in this doorway at this moment, but not sorry enough to leave. "There's a situation in the ceremony space. You need to know about it now." Raphael looked at him. "What situation?" "Carolyn," Marcus said. "She's talking. To people. Specifically to the Mercer Group and to the Delaney family and to Senator Holt's people." He paused. "About the boys. About what she saw when they arrived." Raphael went very still. "She's telling them," Marcus said carefully, "that the children look like you, and she's asking questions. Specifically, she's asking who knew about Elena's medical situation when the marriage ended, and she's asking whether anyone has documentation, and she's—" He stopped. "She's building something, sir, in front of the guests." Valentina had turned from the window. She was watching Raphael's face. Raphael said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "Where is she now?" "Still in the ceremony space, north edge of the tent. She has maybe 8 people with her." "Who's Damien with?" "Last I saw, he was near the main gate." "Get him to Carolyn, quietly. Don't make it look like containment." His voice had shifted. The tone he used when he was operating, stripped of everything personal, purely functional. "Tell him I want her redirected inside, politely, not forced." "Yes, sir." "And find out who else she's talked to. I need a list." Marcus left. Raphael stood for a moment. Then he turned to Valentina, and when he looked at her, something had shifted in his expression. Not what she'd been seeing for the past 10 minutes. Not the stripped-down rawness of the man who had said both in a small, specific voice. This was the other thing. The thing underneath the rawness. The thing that had always been underneath it. The mechanism that had built the empire and told the lie and designed the service gate protocol. "I need to handle this," he said. "Yes," Valentina said. "I can see that." "We can finish this conversation after." "No," she said. "We can't." He stopped. She looked at him. She was very composed, standing in her wedding dress with her hands at her sides. And the composure was real. He could read the difference between performed and real. He'd made a science of it. This was real. The composure of a woman who had arrived at something and was standing in it. "You just switched," she said. "You were here with me, having the conversation, and then Marcus came in and you switched, like a circuit." She wasn't accusing him. She was describing something she was observing in real time. That's who you are when something threatens your control. That's the thing you go back to. "I have 400 people on my lawn." "I know." She crossed to the dressing table and picked up her veil. She held it in her hands and looked at it for a moment. "I need to think," she said. "I need some time to think about what I'm going to do. And I think you should go handle what you need to handle." She set the veil back down. "But I need you to know, when you come back from handling it, I'm going to need different answers than the ones I've been getting. And if you can't give them, then this—" She gestured at the dress, the room, the window with the ceremony space visible beyond it. "This isn't going to happen." Raphael looked at her. She looked back. He left. In the ceremony space, Carolyn Voss was not conducting herself as a woman who had been asked to be quiet. She was conducting herself as a woman who had spent 60 years in Raphael's world and had reached the age at which the consequences of speaking were less frightening than the consequences of staying silent, and she was conducting herself accordingly. She stood with the Mercer Group, Victor Mercer, who ran the East Atlanta distribution network, and his wife Patricia, who remembered Elena from the early years of the marriage and had always liked her. And she was speaking in the low, deliberate register of someone who wanted to be understood clearly and did not need volume to accomplish it. "I'm telling you what I saw," Carolyn said. "Those children are his. You have eyes. You look at those boys and tell me what you see." Patricia Mercer said nothing, but she had looked at the boys when Elena had moved through the space, and her expression had said what she wasn't saying out loud. Victor Mercer was a man who ran his world the way Raphael ran his, with the understanding that information was currency and the first person to have it was the person with the most leverage. He was not a man who responded to things emotionally. He was watching Carolyn the way a banker watched a market. "What you're suggesting," he said carefully, has significant implications. I'm not suggesting anything, Carolyn said. I'm telling you what's in front of your face. What the implications are is up to all of us to work out. He told everyone it was her, Patricia said quietly. It was the first thing she'd contributed. Yes, Carolyn said. He did. And if it wasn't her, then a woman was blamed for something she didn't do, in this world, in front of these people, and everyone here accepted it, because everyone here accepted whatever Raphael said about it. She looked at Patricia, then Victor. Which is worth sitting with for a moment. Victor Mercer's jaw moved slightly. He was doing calculations. Carolyn knew the calculations, the ones about power, about what this information meant for the structure of Raphael's authority, about what men in his position did when the story they'd built turned out to have a cracked foundation. She knew those calculations because she'd watched men like him run them her entire life. What she was betting on was that enough of the people here today had human beings somewhere inside the strategic machinery, that the sight of 3 5-year-old boys who looked exactly like a man who had claimed his ex-wife was barren would activate something that pure calculation couldn't suppress. She was still betting on it when Damien appeared at her elbow. "Carolyn," he said quietly, "Raphael would like you to come inside." She looked at him. "I imagine he would." "He's asking, not ordering. That's a thin distinction, and we both know it." She studied Damien's face. She had known him for 11 years, had watched him move through Raphael's world with that particular careful stillness. She knew, from the way he was standing, that something had shifted in him today. "Have you told him?" she said. "The thing you know?" Damien's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "I've told him some of it. All of it needs to be told." "I know." In front of people. In front of the people who heard the original story. She kept her voice low and precise. "Not in a private room where he can manage it. Not in his study with the door closed. Out here." She gestured at the ceremony space, the guests, the whole assembled structure of Raphael's audience. Because that's where the lie was told, and that's where it needs to be corrected. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the guest space, at the rows of chairs now mostly full, at the peripheral clusters of people who were watching this conversation from a careful distance. "He's not going to let that happen," Damien said. "He can't stop it," Carolyn said. "That's what he doesn't understand yet. He designed this day to be a demonstration of his control. But control is a story too, and stories depend on everyone agreeing to keep telling them." She turned to fully face him. "Are you going to keep telling this one?" The question landed with the specific weight she had intended. Damien stood with it. His face was the controlled face, the professional face, but she watched it shift, the cost of what he'd been carrying moving visibly through his features for one unguarded second. "No," he said. "I'm not." Carolyn nodded once. "Then stay here," she said. "Don't take me inside." Raphael found Elena near the edge of the tent canopy where he had first seen her from across the lawn. Priya was gone. She'd taken the boys to find a quieter spot away from the crowd, she told Elena before she left. And the look she gave Elena over the boys' heads said, "This is your moment." Carolyn was visible at a distance, in conversation near the guest seating. Elena had been watching that conversation with peripheral attention, reading the body language from 30 feet away. Not certain what was being said, but certain of its direction. When Raphael appeared in front of her, she turned to face him fully. He looked different than he had 20 minutes ago. The composure was back, the professional surface, the controlled authority. But she had known his face too long to be deceived by the surface, and underneath it she could see the thing that had been there when Nico asked about the photograph. The thing that didn't have a name in his operational vocabulary. "I need to know," he said. Quiet. Direct. "Did you know you were pregnant when you left?" She had expected this question. She had prepared for it. What she hadn't entirely prepared for was the specific rawness in his voice when he asked it. Not anger, not accusation, something closer to a man asking about a wound. "No," she said. "I found out 6 weeks after." He absorbed that. "And you didn't tell me." "You had been telling people for 6 weeks that I was the one who couldn't have children," she said. "You had told your family, your associates, people in your network. It had already traveled." She kept her voice even. Not because she didn't feel the anger. She felt it, It was there. She had been feeling it for 3 years. But because she hadn't come here to perform it, I found out I was pregnant and I also found out what you'd been saying. Those two things happened within days of each other. And you decided to disappear. I decided to protect my children from a man who would use them to protect his image. The same way he used me. Something moved through his face. That's not... Elena, I would never have used my own. You used me, she said, quietly, precisely. You used me without hesitation, Raphael. You took a truth that belonged to you and you relocated it onto my body and my name and my entire identity in this world. And you did it with the same operational efficiency you use for everything else. She paused. So yes, I looked at the fact that I was pregnant with your children, and I looked at what you had just demonstrated you were capable of, and I made a decision. He said nothing. I want you to understand that I'm not here today because I want you to suffer, she said. I'm here because my sons are 5 years old, and they deserve to exist in the world without being built on a lie. And I'm here because I am not going to spend the rest of my life being the woman Raphael Voss blamed for his own diagnosis. I'll issue a correction, he said. The word sat between them for a moment, hollow in its inadequacy. He seemed to hear it that way himself. There are people I can call, things I can say to correct what was communicated. You can't unsay what you said to people in this world, Elena said. You know that. You know exactly how information works here. You knew it when you said it. He looked at her. I was a man who operated in a world where admitting fault was structurally dangerous, where the acknowledgement of weakness was indistinguishable from invitation, where the posture of authority was not optional but essential. She watched him stand in that structure and feel, for possibly the first time, how heavy it was. What do you want? He said. I want my name back, she said. Publicly. In front of the people who heard the original story. Elena, I know what you're going to say. What am I going to say? That you can handle it quietly, that you can make calls, send word through the right channels, have the story corrected discreetly, that public acknowledgement in front of your people on your wedding day is something you can't, something that would cost too much for your world to absorb. She tilted her head slightly. Am I wrong? He said nothing, which was the answer. My name in front of those people, she said again. Or my children and I leave, and whatever story gets told about today, I will not correct it. The threat was clear. The implication was clear. That the story Carolyn was apparently already building would have no counter-narrative from Elena, would simply proceed in whatever direction it went, uncontained. In his world, uncontained information was the most dangerous kind. You came here to do this, he said. It wasn't an accusation exactly. It was something between recognition and something bleaker. I came here to exist, she said. Everything else is responding to what you put in motion. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked over her shoulder at the ceremony space, the guests, the arch, the machinery of the day. His jaw was tight. His hands were very still at his sides. And then one of his security team appeared, moving at a pace that said urgency, and the look on the man's face said whatever was happening had already started. Sir, the man said, low and fast, you need to see this. Damien is in the ceremony space. He's talking to the Mercer group, to the Delaney people. I don't know exactly what he's saying, but it's drawing a crowd. He stopped, looked at Elena, looked back at Raphael. It's drawing a crowd, sir. Raphael's face did something Elena had never seen it do in 20 years. It went blank. Not the controlled blank of the operational mask, the blank of a man whose contingencies had run out. He turned and looked at the ceremony space. From where they stood, she could see it too. A cluster of people at the far edge of the seating area, dense, attentive, gathered around two figures she recognized from here as Damien and Carolyn. More people were drifting toward it. The event coordinator was visible at a distance, talking rapidly into a headset, the specific body language of someone whose schedule had just stopped being the point. Call the ceremony, his security man said. We can still, if you want to proceed, we need to. With what? Raphael said. His voice was very quiet. Valentina hasn't come out of the East Wing. The security man looked at him. Sir? She's thinking, Raphael said. The words carried something that in another man might have been called defeat, but in him sounded more like a man reading the topology of a place and understanding, for the first time, that he is lower than he thought he was. She's thinking about whether she wants to do this. He turned back to Elena. She was watching him with that steady, frequency-reading attention. The truth, he said. It came out stripped of everything else. If I tell the truth in front of all of them, today, my authority in this world. I know what it costs, she said. Then why? Because it cost me more, she said, and I didn't choose it. The sound from the ceremony space was growing, not loud, not chaotic, just the particular sound of information moving through a crowd, the murmur and shift of a group of people who are learning something that is rearranging the furniture of what they thought they knew. Raphael stood between two things: the ceremony space, where Damien's voice was doing what Damien had said it would do, and Elena, who was standing in a gold dress with her hands at her sides and her face very still and waiting. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Valentina. I'm coming out. Don't stop me. He read it twice. He stood very still with the phone in his hand. And somewhere in the back of the ceremony space, Matteo Marquette, who was 5 years old and had been watching the adults with the particular patience of a child waiting for something to resolve, looked up at his mother's friend Priya and asked, in a clear and carrying voice that happened to reach several nearby guests, in the way that children's voices sometimes did, without malice and without theater, "Is that man our dad?" The question dropped into the space like a coin into deep water. The guests nearest to him went quiet. The quiet spread. Raphael heard it from where he was standing. He turned and looked across the space at his son, who was standing with his brothers near the edge of the tent canopy, looking at him with dark eyes that were exactly his own, waiting with a 5-year-old's uncomplicated expectation for someone to give him the honest answer to a simple question. And in that moment, with the crowd going quiet around him, and Damien's voice audible in the distance, and Valentina's text on his phone, and Elena standing 3 feet away with 3 years of his lie between them, Raphael Voss reached the place where a man either becomes something different or becomes less than what he was. And he stood at that edge, on the most controlled day of his most carefully designed life, and felt the ground he had built his empire on begin, at last, to move. Matteo's question hung in the air above the tent canopy like smoke that wouldn't clear. The guests nearest to him, a cluster of 6, 7 people, the Delaney family and 2 of the Mercer associates, and a woman Elena didn't recognize who had been standing with them, had gone completely quiet in the way that people go quiet when they've heard something that recalibrates the room. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the specific, terrible quiet of truth arriving in a form too simple to dismiss. A 5-year-old asking if a man was his father. Priya had put her hand on Matteo's shoulder. Not to silence him, it was too late for that, just the instinct to be close to him. Luca had moved against Matteo's side the way he always did when he felt the temperature in a room change. Nico was watching Raphael across the space with those dark, steady eyes that didn't look away. Raphael hadn't moved. He stood 3 feet from Elena with his phone in his hand and Valentina's text on the screen and the sound of his son's voice still in the air, and something was happening in his body that had nothing to do with strategy. His chest felt wrong, too tight, the breath coming in slightly shorter than it should. A physical thing, animal and involuntary, the body's response to standing at the exact center of everything it had been avoiding. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Elena. She was watching him. Not with triumph. He had braced for triumph, had prepared a response to triumph, but this was not that. She was watching him the way she always had, with the attention that went underneath the surface. And what he saw in her face was not satisfaction, but something more difficult. She was waiting to see what he was made of when there was nothing left to manage. He turned toward the ceremony space. He walked. The crowd opened for him in the way crowds had always opened for Raphael Voss. Not from affection, though some of that was present, but from the decades-deep instinct that this was a man whose approach required space. People stepped aside. Conversations dropped. The event coordinator, who had been trying for the past 6 minutes to restore some version of the schedule's logic, saw him coming and went still. Damien saw him coming from across the space and stopped talking. The Mercer group, the Delaney family, the dozen people who had gathered around the truth that was being assembled in real time, they all turned. Senator Holt's aide, who had been recording something on his phone and had just decided that this was not a day for recordings, slid the phone into his jacket. Victor Mercer's face was a study in calibration. The face of a man who was waiting to see which direction the wind was going before he committed to a direction of his own. Carolyn was at the edge of the group. When Raphael reached the circle, she looked at him. Not defiantly, not apologetically, just the look of a woman who had made her decision and was standing behind it. "Raphael," she said. "Carolyn," he said. A silence. Then he looked at the assembled faces. He knew most of them. He had done business with most of them, had broken bread with them, had in several cases done things on their behalf that could not be spoken of in daylight. He knew their names and their operations and their weaknesses and their pressure points. He had cultivated this network for 20 years with the understanding that its foundation was the perception of his absolute authority. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He breathed in once, the technique from his father, and something in him said clearly and without drama, "This is the moment. There is no protocol for this. There is no managed version of what comes next." 3 years ago, he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. He had always known how to make his voice carry. "I told people something that wasn't true. I told people that the end of my marriage was because of a medical issue on Elena's side." He paused. The pause was not for effect. He needed it. The medical issue was mine. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than Mateo's question had produced. That silence had been the quiet of shock. This silence was the quiet of a room full of people recalibrating an entire architecture at once. Victor Mercer's expression moved. One small degree. Carolyn looked at her nephew with something in her face that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. "I was diagnosed with a condition that made biological children unlikely," Raphael continued. "I received that diagnosis, and I was unable." He stopped. He was not a man who used the word unable in front of other people. He restarted. "I chose to manage how that information was presented. I put it on Elena. That was a lie. I told that lie in front of people in this room, and I told it knowing what it would cost her in this world." His jaw tightened. "That is the truth. The rest of what you heard about why she left and what happened to the marriage was built on that lie." Someone in the crowd made a sound. Not words, just the involuntary sound of a breath catching. Raphael looked at Damien. Damien looked back at him with the face of a man who was watching something he had waited 3 years to see, and found that the watching of it was more complicated than the waiting for it had been. "I'm not telling you this because I've been outmaneuvered," Raphael said. He looked at the group, at Mercer, at the Delaney people, at Carolyn. "I'm telling you this because there are 3 children on this property today who are mine. And whatever else I am not going to stand in front of them and tell another version of a lie that was wrong the first time." He turned and walked away from the circle before anyone could respond. But I was 3 steps from the tent line when Eduardo Reyes stepped into his path. Eduardo was 63, with the build of a man who had been powerful once and maintained the frame of it even as other things had changed. He ran the northern Georgia corridor, supply, movement, the infrastructure that Raphael's entire eastern network depended on. He had been with the Voss family since Raphael's father's time. He was, in the careful language of their world, essential. He was also the man who had heard Raphael's original story 3 years ago and had repeated it, specifically, to 6 of his own associates with the authority of someone confirming information from the source. He looked at Raphael now with an expression that was not angry and not sympathetic, and was something Raphael recognized as the face of a man recalculating leverage. "That's a significant thing to say in front of these people," Eduardo said. "I'm aware. There are going to be questions about your judgment, about what else has been managed." "I imagine so." Eduardo studied him. "This affects our arrangement. Our arrangement involves the movement of product through 3 counties and has nothing to do with my marriage," Raphael said. His voice was flat and direct. "If you're telling me you're reconsidering based on my personal situation, say that clearly. I'm telling you that men in our world make decisions about who they trust based on a complete picture." Eduardo stepped slightly closer. Not threatening. Eduardo didn't need to be physically threatening. His size and tenure communicated threat without requiring it. "And the picture just changed. The picture got more accurate," Raphael said. "If you made decisions based on the old version, that's a problem with your information, not mine." Eduardo's eyes went narrow. "You're in a difficult position to be speaking to me that way." "I'm in the only position I have." Raphael held the older man's gaze. His chest was still tight, his breath still shorter than he wanted, but his voice was entirely controlled. Eduardo, I have been running this operation for 20 years. You know what that means. You know what I've done for the people in this network and what I've built and what the alternatives look like. One personal admission doesn't change the operational record. A pause. But if you need time to recalibrate, take it. I'll be here. Eduardo looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, the calculation running its full course. Then he stepped aside. Raphael walked past him. He found Valentina at the edge of the main house, coming down the steps from the east wing entrance. She had changed. The wedding dress was gone. She was in a dark coat over what appeared to be travel clothes, and she was carrying a small bag, and the veil was not with her. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. She stopped 3 steps above him, which put them at eye level. You talked, she said. It wasn't a question. She had heard some of it, had been close enough to the open window of the east wing. Yes. Was it enough? I don't know yet. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear and dry, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision and was already living inside it. I heard what you said, about the diagnosis, about the lie. She paused. It was the right thing to say. But, he said. She exhaled once. But you said it when it was the only thing left to say, when the walls had already come in, when your aunt was talking to your network and your ex-wife was standing in your tent and your son had just asked in front of everyone if you were his father. She kept her voice even. I need to know if you would have said it any other way. If the choice had been yours, on a day that wasn't already on fire. If you would have told the truth, when the truth still cost you something. He didn't answer immediately. He owed her the honesty of not answering immediately. I don't know, he said. She nodded, slowly. I appreciate that, she said, that you didn't say yes. Valentina, I'm not angry, she said. I want you to know that. I made choices in this arrangement too. I chose to stay with things I didn't fully look at. She came down the last 3 steps and stood on the path in front of him. But I can't marry a man who is still in the middle of becoming something. Not today. Maybe not at all. She looked at him steadily. You have 3 children out there, and a woman you wronged severely, and an organization watching to see what you do next. You have a lot of work to do. I know. She reached up and removed the engagement ring. She held it out to him. Her hand was completely steady. He looked at the ring for a moment. He took it. The small weight of it in his palm had a specific quality, not of loss exactly, more of consequence, the physical form of the distance between who he had designed this day to make him look like and who he had turned out to be. Take care of your sons, Valentina said. She walked past him toward the front of the house where, he understood, a car was waiting. He did not watch her go. When he turned back to the ceremony space, the situation had evolved. What had been a contained gathering around Damien and Carolyn was now a different thing. The seating area had broken its formal arrangement. People were standing, moving in clusters, the clean rows of chairs disrupted by the organic geometry of a crowd processing information. The event coordinator had abandoned the headset. 2 of the catering staff had retreated to the tent's service corridor, reading the atmosphere the way you read weather before a front moves in. Raphael scanned the space and found the pressure points. Victor Mercer was now in conversation with Eduardo. That was a combination that required attention. The 2 men were not friends. They occupied adjacent territories with the specific wariness of neighbors who shared a fence line and both wanted it moved. The fact that they were talking meant they were consolidating something, or deciding whether to. Damien was standing alone near the edge of the seating area. He had stopped talking. He looked like a man who had thrown a stone and was watching the water and had not yet decided whether what he'd done was the right thing. Elena was near the boys. Raphael walked toward her. She saw him coming. She did not move toward him or away from him. Priya shifted slightly, a protective instinct, the body's grammar, but Elena put one hand briefly on her arm and Priya held. Raphael stopped in front of her. He was aware of people watching. He was aware of the Mercer-Eduardo conversation in his peripheral vision, and Damien's stillness, and Carolyn nearby, and the boys, specifically Nico, who was watching this approach with the full inventory of his attention. I told them the truth, he said. I heard. All of it, the diagnosis, the lie. What I did to your name. He kept his voice low, but he didn't drop it to a private register. There were people close enough to hear, and he had decided in the walk from the main house steps to this point that private registers were no longer the instrument he was using today. I'm telling you now what I told them. Elena looked at him. I know, she said. Carolyn texted me while you were talking. He absorbed this. The image of his aunt texting Elena in real time, the relay of his own confession from across the space. Then you know it's done. The words are done, she said. The rest is longer. I know that. She studied him. What do you want, Raphael? I want to know my sons, he said. The words came out more simply than he'd intended. Not strategically simple, genuinely, almost nakedly simple. The sentence of a man who had stripped the operational language out of something that didn't work in operational language. Elena was quiet. I know I don't have the right to want that, he said. I know what I did. I know what the last 3 years were for you, what it cost, what I made you carry. I'm not standing here asking you to. I'm not asking for anything that you aren't able to give. But I need you to know that those boys exist for me now in a way I can't unfeel. His jaw tightened. I'm not using them. I'm not making a claim. I'm telling you what's true. She looked at him for a long time. Behind her, Nico had moved slightly forward, not toward Raphael, just a readjustment, the physical expression of a child who was fully present in a moment and wanted his presence registered. He asked about you, Elena said, quietly. Nico, 2 years ago. He found a photograph. I didn't know he'd found it, and he asked me who you were. I told him you were someone I used to know and that the situation was complicated. She paused. He said, did he hurt you? And I said, yes. And he said, are you still hurt? And I said, not the same way. And he said, okay. And he put the photograph back and went to bed. Raphael said nothing. He couldn't. He's been waiting, Elena said. He knew, I think, before today. In the way children know things they don't have language for yet. He's been waiting to see what kind of man you were going to be when it mattered. Her voice was level, but the level was a thing she was maintaining with effort. So was I. The sounds of the estate moved around them, the crowd still shifting and murmuring, the distant voice of someone trying to determine the official status of the ceremony, the ordinary noise of a large event that had lost its shape. I'm not the man I should have been, Raphael said. No, she agreed. I'm trying to determine what that means going forward. That's going to take a long time, she said, and it's going to require things you're not comfortable requiring of yourself. I know. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she turned and looked at Nico, who was standing 3 feet away with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on Raphael, steady and clear and waiting. Nico, Elena said. He looked at her. This is Raphael, she said. The boy looked at Raphael. Raphael looked at the boy. Something moved in the space between them. Not resolution, not forgiveness, not any of the large things that the day had been trafficking in. Something smaller and more durable. Recognition. Nico extended his hand. It was such a formal gesture for a 5-year-old that it might have been almost comic in a different context. Raphael looked at the small hand, the serious face, the eyes that were his own, and he crouched down to the boy's level. He shook it. Hi, Nico said. Hi, Raphael said. Matteo appeared immediately from behind Priya, pebble still in hand. I'm Matteo, he said with zero preamble. Are you actually our dad, or is Mom still figuring it out? Priya made a sound that was suppressed laughter. Elena said very quietly, Matteo. What? What? I just want to know. He looked at Raphael with the directness that was apparently a family trait, currently manifesting at 37 inches tall. Raphael looked at this child, the one who had been studying pebbles all afternoon with the same concentration his grandfather had brought to ledgers, and his father had brought to maps, and he himself brought to satellite images of property lines. And he said, with more certainty than he had brought to almost anything else today, yes, he said, I'm your dad. Matteo considered this. Then he held out the pebble. This one has 3 colors, he said. You can have it if you want. I have more. Raphael took the pebble. He held it in his hand alongside Valentina's ring, the small weight of both things, the 2 textures of what the day had cost and what it had given. And then Victor Mercer's voice cut across the space. Not shouting, but carrying, the voice of a man who had spent decades making himself heard in rooms full of other powerful men. Raphael. He stood up, turned. Mercer was walking toward him with Eduardo 2 steps behind, and the expression on Mercer's face was not the calibrating expression from before. It had resolved into something more specific, and it was not friendly. "We need to talk," Mercer said. "Now." Raphael handed the pebble back to Matteo. He looked at Elena once, a look that contained, in its brevity, everything that had not yet been said and would require much more time to say, and then he turned to face the 2 men who had just decided, together, that whatever Raphael Voss had done today required an answer that was not going to be comfortable. "All right," he said. He walked toward them. The conversation happened in the open, which was Mercer's choice, and Raphael understood the choice. An open conversation in front of the remaining guests was a public conversation, and public conversations in this world established records that private ones didn't. Mercer stopped 10 feet from the nearest guest cluster, close enough to be seen, far enough for the words to stay within the 3 of them. "You understand what you've done," Mercer said. It was not a question. "I told the truth," Raphael said. "Yes. You told the truth in front of 40 people who now know that you lied to all of us for 3 years. Eduardo's voice, level and precise. "That is not a private matter. What you said about your ex-wife was said on behalf of this organization's culture. It was repeated as information that came from you." "I know." "Which means our credibility was attached to it," Mercer said. "Which means we were used to distribute a lie." "Yes," Raphael said. "You were. I'm sorry for that." The apology landed badly, not because it wasn't genuine, but because in their world apologies were not currency. They were concessions, and concessions changed the math of relationships permanently. "You're going to have trouble," Mercer said, "in the next weeks. There are people who will see today as instability, as a man losing control of his own house. They will test that." "I know. And you're going to handle that while also managing whatever happens with the woman and the children." His voice was not unkind exactly, but it had no softness in it. "That is a significant operational burden." "I'm aware." "I want to know," Eduardo said, taking 1 step forward, "what your plan is. Specifically, not in general. What do you do tomorrow?" Raphael looked at him. "I thought about the study, the bourbon at 2 in the morning, the camera feeds." He thought about 3 years of a story he had told with such consistency that he had almost begun to believe it. He thought about a pebble with 3 colors and a boy who had been waiting, in his quiet and processing way, to see what kind of man showed up. He breathed in once, out. "I talk to my sons," he said. "I talk to their mother. I figure out what that looks like going forward." He held Mercer's gaze, then Eduardo's. "And then I address every operational matter in this organization the way I've addressed it for 20 years, which is with full information and without the kind of narrative management that I just demonstrated does not hold." A silence. Mercer looked at Eduardo. Eduardo looked at the ground briefly, then back at Raphael. 2 weeks, Mercer said. "You have 2 weeks before the next corridor meeting. You come to that table with a plan for the northeastern distribution gap and a clear picture of your house's stability." He paused. "If you can't do that, I can do that," Raphael said. Mercer held his gaze for 1 more second. Then he nodded once, the minimal acknowledgement of a man who was not giving approval but was agreeing to wait. He turned and walked away. Eduardo followed after a moment, his large frame moving through the disrupted crowd with the deliberateness of a man who had made a decision and would live with the cost of it. Raphael stood where he was. The ceremony space around him was entirely changed from what it had been 2 hours ago. The clean rows of chairs broken, the guests in clusters, the event coordinator visible near the catering tent in conversation with 2 staff members about what to do with the food, the flowers, the arch still standing with its arrangement of white and cream, and the afternoon light on it going golden now as the sun moved west. His phone buzzed once. He didn't check it. He turned back to where Elena was standing. She had watched the Mercer conversation from a distance. She was watching him now as he walked back. The boys were around her. Matteo had returned to Pebble investigation. Luca had apparently made friends with one of the catering staff's children. Nico was standing beside his mother, very still. Damien fell into step beside Raphael as he crossed the space. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Damien said very quietly, "You okay?" "No," Raphael said. "That's probably right." "2 weeks," Raphael said. "Mercer gave me 2 weeks." "I heard." "I need your help with the corridor." Damien was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure what I am to this organization anymore," he said. "After today." "You're the man who told the truth when I couldn't," Raphael said, "which makes you the most valuable person here." He didn't look at Damien when he said it. He kept walking. "If you'll stay." Damien said nothing. They reached Elena. She looked at both of them. At Damien first, with a nod that carried 3 years of complicated history in it, the acknowledgement of a man who had stayed silent and then, finally, hadn't. Then at Raphael. "The boys are hungry," she said. "It's past their dinner time." It was such a specifically ordinary thing to say, in the middle of everything, that Raphael felt something happen in his chest that was different from the tightness of the afternoon. Something that loosened, slightly, without his permission. "There's food," he said. "Inside, the catering, there's a full kitchen." Elena looked at him. She was assessing something. Not his operational capacity, not his authority, something smaller and more fundamental. The question of whether the man standing in front of her on the ruins of his most carefully designed day was someone she could trust to be in the same room as her sons without it costing them something. "Nico," she said, without taking her eyes off Raphael. "What do you think?" Nico looked at his mother, then at Raphael. The weighing process was visible in his small face. The same long, slow attention he brought to everything, that quality of not arriving at conclusions before the data was in. "I think he's trying," Nico said. Elena looked at Raphael for one more second. "All right," she said. "We'll eat inside." They moved toward the main house, Elena, the boys, Priya at the edge of the group, Damien a step behind. Raphael walked beside them, not ahead, not directing, not managing the movement, just alongside. And in the ceremony space behind them, the white arch stood in the golden afternoon light, the flowers still arranged on it, the chairs still mostly in their rows, the architecture of a day that had been designed to mean one thing and had become, in the end, something else entirely. And from the driveway, the sound of a car moving away. Steady, unhurried, the sound of a woman who had made her decision and was living in it. And then it was gone, and the estate was quiet, except for the voices of 3 boys moving toward the main house, and the sound of the last of the afternoon birds, and the particular silence of a world that was about to require something completely different from the man who ran it. Raphael reached the main house steps. He stopped for one moment and looked back, at the ceremony space, the arch, the chairs, the path this day had taken from what he had designed it to be. Then he turned and followed his sons inside. The kitchen of the Voss estate was designed for events, not for families. It was large enough for a catering staff of 20, with stainless steel surfaces and industrial equipment and lighting that was functional rather than warm. And it felt, when Elena walked into it with 3 hungry boys and a man who owned it, but had never used it for anything like this, like a stage set for a domestic scene that none of them had rehearsed. Luca immediately found the bread rolls that had been staged for the reception and declared them acceptable. Matteo wanted to know if there was anything with cheese. Nico sat on a stool at the prep counter and watched the catering staff. 2 of them had stayed, uncertain of their status in the collapsed event, move around each other with the quiet efficiency of people who were very deliberately not making eye contact with anyone who might give them instructions. Priya stood near the door with her arms crossed, and her expression the specific expression of a woman who had agreed to a thing and was seeing it through but was reserving judgment on whether it had been the right call. Raphael told the catering staff they could go. They went with visible relief. He found bread and cheese and cold cuts in the refrigerator. The kitchen was fully stocked for the reception that hadn't happened, and he put them on the counter without ceremony, without the performance of hospitality that he would have produced in any other context. He just put the food down. It was the most unmediated thing Elena had seen him do in 20 years of knowing him. The boys ate. Children had the gift of moving through complexity toward the immediate and concrete. And the immediate concrete thing was that it was past dinner time and they were hungry, and the counter had food on it, and that was sufficient. Matteo organized his plate with a specificity that was almost architectural. Luca ate with speed and satisfaction. Nico ate slowly and kept watching the room. Elena sat on a stool across from Raphael, who had not eaten anything and was holding a glass of water he had poured for himself and not drunk. Priya, reading the room, said something to the boys about finding the bathroom and took all three of them out of the kitchen, leaving Elena and Raphael in the specific silence of a large room that had just become smaller. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. It wasn't the hostile silence of the morning or the loaded silence of the ceremony space confrontation. It was a different kind. The silence of two people who had said significant things in front of significant audiences and now had to sit with what that meant without the audience to structure around. "She's gone," Elena said. It was about Valentina. It was not a question. "Yes. I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. The look contained surprise, genuine, unmanaged. "You're sorry." She didn't deserve to be part of this. Elena kept her voice even. She didn't create this situation. She walked into it not knowing what it was, and what happened to her today was a cost of your choices, but she's the one who paid it. She paused. "So yes, I'm sorry for her." Raphael set down the water glass. He looked at his hands on the counter. "She told me I was still in love with you," he said. The sentence arrived without warning, laid flat, no particular inflection to soften or harden it. Elena said nothing. "I told her that wasn't why I invited you." He didn't look up. "She asked me if I'd have told the truth on a day that wasn't already burning. I told her I didn't know." He moved his thumb against the edge of the counter, a slight unconscious motion. "That's the most honest thing I've said to anyone in a long time." "That you didn't know?" "That I couldn't tell the difference anymore between what I actually felt and what I had constructed to explain what I felt." He looked up. "I told a lie about you for 3 years. I told it so consistently that I had started using it as information. I had started making other decisions based on it, as if it were true. That's not—" He stopped, started again. "That's a specific kind of broken, to lie until you lose track of the original shape of the thing." Elena looked at him. She let what he'd said sit in the air without rushing to respond to it, which was something she had learned. The value of letting difficult things take up their full space before you decided what to do with them. "I know about that kind of broken," she said finally. "I spent a year after I left here trying to tell myself you had reasons, that there was context I didn't have, that the man I married wasn't capable of what you did." She paused. "I had to stop doing that before I could actually build anything. I had to let you be exactly what you'd been, without the explanation softening it. And what was I? You were a man who chose his pride over the truth and paid for it with someone else's life." She said it without anger. The anger had been there. It had been enormous, had taken up most of the first year, but it had burned down to something more structural, a fact rather than a fire. "That's what you were. That's what happened." Raphael absorbed this without deflection. She noticed that. 3 years ago, he would have found the counter-argument, would have managed the framing, would have moved the conversation onto terrain where he had more control. He didn't do any of that. He sat with what she'd said and let it be what it was. "Yes," he said. "And today you said the truth out loud," she said, "in front of those people, with everything it cost." She looked at him carefully. "That matters. I'm not dismissing it, but it doesn't undo 3 years, and it doesn't tell me who you are tomorrow, and it doesn't answer the question of whether my sons can have a father who is safe for them." "Safe," he said. "You run an organization that operates outside the law. You make decisions with consequences. You live in a world where the people around you get hurt as a function of proximity to what you do." She kept her voice level, factual, not punishing. "I raised 3 children at a careful distance from that world, and I did it on purpose. I know. So I need to know." She stopped, gathered. "I need to know if what happened today changes what you do. Not what you say, what you actually do." He was quiet for a moment. "I can't walk away from the organization overnight. It doesn't work like that. There are people, arrangements, dependencies. I know how it works," she said. "But I'm also aware," he continued, "that I can't. That what I want the next part of my life to look like doesn't fit inside what I've been running." He said it carefully, as if working it out while speaking, which she thought was probably what was happening. "I've known that for longer than today. Today made it impossible to not know." "What does that mean concretely?" It means I have a meeting in 2 weeks with Mercer and Eduardo about the corridor, and after that meeting, I'm going to begin transitioning certain operations. Not all at once. Not in a way that creates a vacuum that gets filled by something worse, but a direction. He met her eyes. A real direction, not a managed version of a direction. Elena looked at him for a long time. She was reading his frequency, the thing she had always been able to do, that he had always both resented and needed. And what she was reading was not the performance of intent, but the more complicated signal of a man who had arrived at something real and didn't yet know all of what it would cost him. I'll believe it when it's true, she said. That's fair. It might take years. I know. And in the meantime, she said, any relationship between you and my sons happens on my terms, my schedule, my judgment about what's appropriate at each step. Yes, he said, without hesitation. She studied him. The no hesitation was itself information, the absence of the negotiation she had expected, the instinct to manage the terms. He had simply agreed. Nico is going to ask you hard questions, she said. He asks everyone hard questions. He's been doing it since he was 3. Something moved in Raphael's face, something that was adjacent to what she would have called, in anyone else, tenderness, though on his face it looked more like the careful handling of something fragile. He seems like a person worth answering honestly. He'll know if you don't, she said. I know, Raphael said. He has your eyes. She blinked. It was the last thing she had expected him to say. He has your jaw, she said. The rest of him is you. She looked away briefly, at the counter, at the food the boys had left in their particular patterns. Mateo's orderly organization, Luca's rapid devastation, Nico's careful, half-finished plate. 3 different relationships with the same meal. I kept a photograph, she said quietly. She was looking at the counter when she said it. He told you that, this afternoon. Yes. I kept it because I needed... She stopped, started again, more honestly. I kept it because I needed the boys to have a face for the concept of their father. Something real, not an absence. She looked up. I didn't know what I was going to do with it eventually. I just knew that erasing you entirely felt like building them on a gap. Raphael said nothing. His expression had gone somewhere she couldn't fully read, which was rare. She had always been able to read him. That was for them, she said. Not for me. I know, he said. I need you to understand the difference. I do. He looked at his hands again. Elena, what I did to you, the lie, the way it traveled, the 3 years of you carrying something that belonged to me, I can't. There isn't a word for that in any language I know. What I said today in front of those people is the minimum, the floor. I'm not presenting it as sufficient. It isn't sufficient, she said. No. It's a beginning. He looked up. I said it's a beginning, she said, not an ending, not a resolution. A beginning of something that might, over a long time, with consistent behavior and not words, might become something my children can build on. She held his gaze. That's all I'm offering today. The possibility of a beginning. Raphael Voss, who had spent 20 years in a world where weakness was invitation and every vulnerability was a position to be managed, sat in the kitchen of his estate on the night of his collapsed wedding and received the smallest possible offering from the woman he had wronged. And he received it without negotiating it into something larger, without reframing it into something more favorable, without managing it at all. Thank you, he said. Damien found Carolyn in the front room of the main house, sitting in one of the formal chairs with a glass of water, and the specific stillness of a woman who had spent a great deal of energy and was now letting herself stop. He sat across from her without asking if she wanted company. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. After tonight, he said. I'll make sure Raphael has what he needs for the corridor meeting. Then I'm done. Carolyn looked at him. You've been done for a while, she said. Not unkindly. I stayed too long. People do, she said. In families and in organizations, they're not always different. She looked at her water glass. He told the truth today. That means something. It means he got to the place where the truth was the only thing left, Damien said. I want to believe it means more than that. I'm not sure yet. Neither is he, Carolyn said. That's probably healthier than certainty would be. Damien was quiet for a moment. What happens to the organization, he said, in the next months? People are going to test him. Yes, she said. He'll need to hold it together while transitioning it. That's not a simple thing. Raphael has never done simple things. She set the water glass down. He'll do it badly at first and then better. He's always been like that. He gets worse before he gets better, but he does get better. She looked at Damien directly. What about you? I have some money saved. I've been thinking about, there's a security consulting operation in Nashville. Legitimate. A man I know from before all this. He looked at his hands. I want to work at something I can describe to people. Carolyn nodded. Good, she said simply. I stayed too long, he said again. I know, she said. So did I, in different ways. She looked at the front room around them. The formal furniture, the art that had been in the family for generations. The architecture of a life built on foundations that had never been fully examined. Elena's children are going to grow up and want to understand their history, all of it. That's going to require honesty from everyone who was part of this. I'll be available, Damien said, if they need to know things, when they're old enough. That's the right answer. He stood up. He looked at her. This woman who had raised herself inside the same world he was leaving and had never fully left it herself and had chosen today, at 60-something, to be the person who said the quiet part out loud in a crowd. You didn't have to do what you did today, he said. Of course I did, she said simply. He nodded. He walked out. The boys fell asleep in the east wing. It happened the way children's sleep happened, sudden, complete, non-negotiable. Luca went first, horizontally across the width of a bed that was significantly larger than anything in Elena's apartment, one shoe still on. Matteo made it through half of what he was explaining about the different types of rock. He had moved on from pebbles to a broader theoretical framework, before his eyes closed mid-sentence. Nico stayed awake the longest, lying on his back with his eyes on the ceiling, and Elena sat on the edge of the bed beside him in the quiet room. Mom, he said. Yeah. Are we going home tomorrow? Yes. Afternoon flight. He was quiet for a moment. Is he going to come see us in Boston? I don't know yet, she said. We're figuring that out. Nico thought about this with the visible processing that was his signature. He seemed sad, he said. He has some things to work out, she said. Did we make him sad? She looked at him. He was watching the ceiling, not her, which meant he was asking the question seriously rather than performatively. It was a real concern, not a bid for reassurance. No, she said. He made himself sad a long time ago. Your being here made it visible. He moved his eyes from the ceiling to her face. Is that okay? Yes, she said. Sometimes the only way something gets fixed is when it becomes visible. He considered this. Then, okay. He closed his eyes. Within 90 seconds, he was asleep, with the completeness that she had always envied in children, the ability to close a door on the day and be simply, wholly absent from it. She sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes in the quiet room, listening to three small people breathe, and felt the day settle into her body the way difficult days settled. Not painfully, not with the sharp edges it had had while it was happening, but with weight, the cumulative weight of everything that had been carried and said and absorbed and survived. She was tired. She was deeply, thoroughly tired in a way that went past the physical. But underneath the tired was something she hadn't expected to find at the end of this day. She felt lighter, not happy. That was too simple a word for what the day had been. Not healed, not resolved, but something that had been sitting on her chest for 3 years, a specific and constant pressure that she had learned to breathe around, had shifted. Not gone. Shifted. Like a stone that had been moved from the center of a path to the side of it, still present, still real, but no longer the thing she had to navigate around with every step. She stood up. She turned off the light. She walked out of the east wing and down the corridor and through the main house to the back terrace, which overlooked the grounds in the direction where, earlier today, a ceremony space had been assembled and then unmade by the truth. The chairs were still there in the darkness. The arch was still standing. The catering team had cleared the food but not the furniture. That would be tomorrow's work, or the day after's. In the dark, with the grounds quiet and the lights of the estate throwing soft pools onto the lawn. The rows of empty chairs looked like something from a different story than the one that had happened here today. A story that had been planned and then replaced by a true one. Elena stood on the terrace and breathed the night air. She heard the door behind her open. She didn't turn around. Raphael came to stand beside her at the terrace railing. He didn't speak. He was looking at the same thing she was looking at. The empty ceremony space, the arch, the night settling over the estate. They stood like that for a while. A minute, maybe more. The kind of standing together that didn't require language, that was its own form of communication, the acknowledgement of proximity without the demand of anything more. "Your aunt," Elena said finally. "She stood beside me today, when you walked across the lawn." "I know," he said. "She told me. She's a good woman." "She's the best thing my family produced," he said without irony. "I've known that since I was 8. Another silence. Warmer than the silences of earlier, less weight in it. "Carolyn used to tell me," Elena said, "in the early years when she would talk about the family, she used to say that the Voss men built their strength out of stone and forgot to leave any windows." She paused. "I think I know what she meant now better than I did then." Raphael said nothing, but she heard him exhale slowly through his nose. "The boys," he said. "Tomorrow, before you go. I want, if they're willing, if you think it's appropriate, I'd like to spend some time with them. Not formally. I don't want it to be a managed thing. I just want to eat breakfast with them, if that's possible." Elena looked at the arch in the darkness. "Ask Nico," she said. "If he says yes, the others will follow. He's the one who decides. He's the one they trust," she said. "Even when he's 5. They've always been like that." A pause. "He'll probably ask you something difficult." "I know," Raphael said. "I'll answer honestly, even if the honest answer isn't good." "Especially then," he said. She looked at him for the first time since they'd come to the terrace. His profile in the dark, the line of his jaw, the stillness he carried that had always been the surface of something more turbulent underneath. She had married this face. She had watched it lie. She had watched it, today, find its way to something true. She did not trust it fully. She would not trust it fully for a long time. But she was standing on a terrace beside it in the dark, and not wanting to be somewhere else, which was its own small and specific thing. "Raphael," she said. "Yes." "Don't build anything on today. Don't make today the story of your transformation. Don't make it the beginning of a new narrative." She kept her voice level, precise. "Just do the next true thing, and then the one after that. That's all I'm asking." He turned and looked at her. The dark made his expression harder to read, which was actually easier. Without the full inventory of what was happening in his face, she could just hear his voice when he said, "All right." "Okay," she said. She went back inside. Breakfast happened. It was not cinematic. It was not the formal restoration of a family. It was Raphael Voss at a kitchen table at 8 in the morning with 3 5-year-old boys who had opinions about everything and no investment in making things comfortable for adults. And it was coffee that Priya made because she didn't trust Raphael's machine. And it was Matteo explaining the entire taxonomy of interesting rocks with a focus and detail that would have been exhausting if it hadn't been so completely itself. Nico asked Raphael 2 questions. The first was, "Why did you say those mean things about our mom?" Raphael looked at the boy across the table. He had prepared for this question. He had not prepared an answer that was adequate because there wasn't one. "Because I was ashamed of something," he said. "And instead of being honest about being ashamed, I put the blame somewhere else, on someone who didn't deserve it." He paused. "That was wrong. It was the worst thing I've done, and I'm sorry for it." Nico looked at him for a long moment with those measuring eyes. "Does Mom know you're sorry?" "I told her." "Did she believe you?" "I think she's waiting to see if my actions match my words." Nico absorbed this. Then he nodded, once, the small conclusive nod of a child who has decided to file the information and continue. "Okay," he said. The second question came 20 minutes later, while Luca was debating the merits of a second roll, and Matteo had moved on to asking Raphael about the security cameras he'd noticed on the estate fence line. Nico looked up from his plate and said, "Are you going to keep being dangerous?" The kitchen went briefly quiet. Raphael looked at Nico. The directness of the question was without hostility. It was the same frequency of inquiry the boy brought to everything, the need to have accurate information about the world. Raphael understood, looking at him, that this was not a child who would accept a softened answer and would remember, specifically, if he received one. "Yes," Raphael said, "for a while. I'm going to work on changing that, but it won't be fast and it won't be simple, and I won't pretend it will be." "How long is a while?" "I don't know exactly." Nico thought about this. "Is Mom safe?" he said. "When she's here." "Yes," Raphael said. "That I can promise." Nico looked at him for one more second. Then he went back to his plate. "Okay," he said. Luca reached for the second roll. Matteo explained that some of the cameras appeared to be the motion-activated kind, which were, in his assessment, more sophisticated than the fixed-point type. Priya caught Elena's eye across the table and said nothing with her face, which said everything. The flight was at 2. Elena packed the boys into the SUV, Priya driving again, the same configuration as the arrival. Though the interior of the vehicle felt different, the air pressure of it changed. Matteo had a new pebble. Luca had eaten so much at breakfast that he was now philosophically opposed to movement. Nico was looking out the window at the estate grounds as they moved down the long drive. Raphael stood at the top of the front steps. He did not follow them to the car. He stood at the steps and watched the SUV prepare to move, and Elena looked at him through the passenger window. His figure, the estate behind him, the morning light on both. And she thought about a handwritten message on a cream envelope and a woman in Boston who had decided that invisible was no longer an option she was willing to be. And she thought about a 5-year-old boy asking about a photograph and a pebble with 3 colors and an arch standing in an empty field with its flowers still arranged. She raised her hand, a single gesture, not a wave exactly, more an acknowledgement. "I see you. I was here. This happened." He raised his in return. Priya drove. The estate disappeared behind the tree line, the long fence receded, the road opened up, and Atlanta spread itself around them in the morning, and the boys were already transitioning to the next thing. Matteo cataloging his geological acquisitions, Luca sleeping, Nico watching the city go past with his usual full inventory attention. Elena faced forward. She didn't think about what came next in any structured way. There would be a flight, and then Boston, and then her apartment and her practice, and the boys' school, and the ordinary continuous labor of a life she had built carefully, piece by piece, on ground she had cleared herself. There would be conversations with a lawyer about documentation. There would be Raphael, in whatever form that took over however long it took to take its form. There would be her sons asking more questions as they got older, harder questions, questions that would require more of her than today had. And today had required a great deal. There would be all of it. But right now, in the car, with the city going past and 3 boys in various states of motion and stillness around her, Elena Marquez sat in the passenger seat and felt for the first time in 3 years, like the ground she was standing on was entirely hers. Not because Raphael had been defeated, not because he had confessed in public, though he had, and it had mattered. Not because the lie had been exposed, though it had, and the exposure had moved something important. But because she had walked into that estate in a gold dress through the main gate on her own terms, and she had stood where she chose to stand, and she had let the truth take up its full space, and none of it, not the service gate protocol, not the handwritten message, not 3 years of carrying something that belonged to him, had made her into what he'd tried to make her. She was a doctor. She was a mother. She was the woman who had driven back into the hardest geography of her life and walked out of it knowing something she had suspected but needed to prove, that she was stronger than the story he had told about her. And that was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. The road ran north out of the city. The morning light came through the windshield at a long angle. Nico turned from the window and looked at her. "Mom," he said. "Yeah, baby." "You okay?" She looked at her hands in her lap. They were completely still. "Yeah," she said, "I really am." He nodded once, the small, conclusive nod. He turned back to the window, and the road carried